They said any man who touched her would be dead in under 60 seconds. And by the look in her eyes, she believed it too. The wind scraped across the docking platform at 40 miles per hour, carrying fine metallic dust that hissed against the hulls of idle ships. And Lyra Vey stood at the center of it all, unmoving, her blue skin faintly glowing beneath the station lights like a warning no one could ignore. One by one, the males of her own kind stepped back, their expressions tight, controlled, logical, as if refusing her was simply another calculation solved. No anger, no cruelty, just absence. That was worse. Ethan Cole watched from the edge of the platform, half hidden behind a maintenance console, a wrench still hanging loose in his hand, his work forgotten the moment he realized what this was. A selection ritual, or something close to it. Except no one was choosing. The display above flickered in alien script, translating in his visor with a soft chime. Genetic resonance mismatch. Hazard level, critical. Estimated survival time upon contact, 58 seconds. Ethan exhaled slowly, fogging the inside of his visor before the filters cleared it away. 58 seconds. Not even a full minute. He'd seen warning labels before. None of them had ever stood this still, this quiet, while being read. Lyra didn't plead. She didn't look at any of them. Her gaze stayed forward, distant, like she had already stepped outside her own life and was just waiting for it to finish without her. The last of the candidates turned away. The crowd began to thin, dispersing with the low murmur of satisfied conclusions. Problem identified. Outcome accepted. Move on. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's it, he muttered under his breath. That's the whole system? His boots sounded louder than they should have as he stepped out onto the open platform, each footfall echoing against metal and silence alike. A few heads turned. Not many. He wasn't part of their equations. Not supposed to be. Lyra noticed him when he was about 10 feet away. Her eyes shifted, slow, deliberate, landing on him with a weight that made the air feel heavier. Not hope, not fear, just recognition of another mistake about to happen. Human, she said, her voice low, steady, carrying over the wind without effort. You should not come closer. Ethan stopped at 5 feet, close enough to see the faint shimmer around her skin, like heat rising off asphalt in summer. His suit sensors ticked softly in his ear, numbers climbing, reading fluctuations he didn't fully understand. He flexed his fingers inside his gloves. Yeah, he said quietly. I've been told that before. Her expression didn't change. You do not understand. Contact will destabilize your internal systems. It is not survivable. Ethan let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. 58 seconds, right? He said, tapping the side of his visor. Your system's pretty specific about it. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise. Small but real. Then you know, she replied. And you still approach. He looked past her for a second, at the emptying platform, at the backs of those who had already decided she wasn't worth the risk. Then he looked back at her. Yeah, he said. I guess I do. He took one more step forward. The sensors in his suit spiked, a sharp tone cutting through the steady hum of the station. But he ignored it, his gaze fixed on hers, steady, unflinching. Because here's the thing, Ethan added, voice softer now, almost lost in the wind. I'm not here to solve your system. He raised his hand, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, every chance to let him walk back into the crowd and be just another statistic that never happened. I'm here to make a different kind of choice. And then, with the platform watching and the countdown already starting somewhere deep in his suit, Ethan Cole reached out toward the one person everyone else had already left behind. The moment his fingers crossed the last inch of cold air, every system in Ethan's suit lit up at once, a cascade of warnings flooding his vision in sharp red text as the contact threshold approached. And still he did not stop, his hand steady despite the rising tremor in his pulse, because something in her eyes had already told him that hesitation would hurt more than whatever came next. The instant their skin met, the world narrowed to a single point of pressure, a quiet, almost imperceptible touch, and then the reaction began. Not explosive, not dramatic, just wrong. His heartbeat stuttered, then surged, too fast, too loud, like it was trying to escape his chest, while a low hum built beneath his skin, spreading from his palm up through his arm in waves that did not belong to him. His suit registered the change immediately, Internal diagnostics racing to interpret what it could not categorize, neural activity spiking, biofeedback loops struggling to stabilize, and somewhere beneath it all a countdown started, soft and precise, ticking down from 58 seconds. Lyra's eyes widened, not in fear for herself, but in recognition of what was already happening inside him. "Release," she said, her voice sharper now, the first crack in her control. "You must release now." Ethan's jaw tightened as he forced air into his lungs, each breath feeling slightly out of sync, like his body had been shifted half a step out of rhythm with itself. He could feel the heat building, not on his skin but deeper, like a current running through nerves that had never been meant to carry it. 47 seconds. The number blinked in the corner of his vision, steady, indifferent. He should have let go. Every instinct that had kept him alive on broken stations and failing ships was telling him the same thing. Pull back. Disconnect. Survive. But he did not. Instead, his grip adjusted, not tighter, not forceful, just enough to remain. "You said contact destabilizes internal systems," he managed, his voice lower now, roughened by the strain creeping into his chest. "You did not say anything about what happens if I am already running something that does not match yours." Confusion flickered across her face, brief but unmistakable. "That is not how resonance functions," she replied, though there was less certainty in her tone now. "It aligns or it destroys. There is no third state." 36 seconds. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing his breathing into a pattern he could control, even as the hum intensified, crawling higher along his arm, pressing against his shoulder like a weight that wanted to push him off balance. His other hand moved without hesitation, reaching to the side of his suit where a small, recessed panel responded to his touch. The interface glowed faintly as it opened, revealing a cluster of manual overrides most people never even knew existed. "Then maybe your system just has not met someone stubborn enough to try one," he said, and there was the faintest edge of a smile in his voice, even as a bead of sweat traced down his temple inside the helmet. He pressed his palm against the panel, fingers spreading as the biometric lock recognized him, and a new set of readings flooded his display, this time not alien, but human, raw and unfiltered. His own neural map, his own biofeedback loops, the things he had spent years modifying, adjusting, breaking, and rebuilding just to survive environments that were never meant for him. 28 seconds. Lyra stared at the panel, then back at him, her expression shifting again, not toward hope, not yet, but toward something more dangerous. Uncertainty. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. Ethan met her gaze, steady despite the pressure building behind his eyes, despite the way his heartbeat refused to settle. "I am changing the rules," he said simply, and as the countdown slipped past the halfway mark, the platform around them fell completely silent, as if the universe itself had decided to wait and see whether a human could survive something no one else had even dared to question. 23 seconds. The number pulsed in Ethan's vision like a quiet drumbeat, steady and unforgiving. But something had changed, something subtle and impossible to ignore, because the hum inside his arm was no longer climbing in sharp, chaotic waves. It was flattening, stretching into a strange, steady frequency that his suit struggled to classify, as if two systems that should have collided were instead circling each other, searching for a balance that was never meant to exist. Ethan felt it before he understood it, a shift beneath the pressure, like standing in ocean water when the current suddenly changes direction, still strong, still dangerous, but no longer trying to pull him under. His breath came slower now, still heavy, but controlled, and for the first time since contact, his heartbeat began to fall back into something close to rhythm. 17 seconds. Lyra did not move, but her focus sharpened, every detail of him reflected in her luminous eyes as she watched the data unfold in real time through whatever perception her species possessed. "This is not possible," she said, though the words lacked conviction, her voice softer now, threaded with something unfamiliar. Not fear, not certainty, something in between. Ethan let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though it came out strained. "You keep saying that," he replied, his fingers still resting against the open panel, maintaining the override as lines of human neural data continued to rewrite the interface between his biology and hers. "But your system also said I should be on the ground by now." 12 seconds. The countdown slowed in his perception, each second stretching longer than the last, not because time had changed, but because his body was no longer racing ahead of it. The heat that had been building deep beneath his skin receded into a dull warmth, present but contained, like an engine idling instead of redlining. His suit chimed again, the tone different this time, uncertain, as if the machine itself was reconsidering its own conclusions. Lyra's gaze dropped briefly to their joined hands, to the point of contact that had defined her entire existence as something to be avoided, something that ended possibilities before they could begin. Her fingers had not pulled away. They had not tightened either. They simply remained, connected, steady. "You are altering your own neural feedback," she said slowly, piecing it together, her voice quieter with each word. "You are preventing alignment." Ethan nodded once, the motion small but deliberate. "Something like that," he said. "If our systems cannot match, then I make sure mine does not try." 8 seconds. The platform remained silent, the distant figures that had once turned away now frozen in place, drawn back by the impossibility unfolding in front of them, though none dared to step closer. This was not their logic anymore. This was something else. Lyra lifted her eyes back to his, and this time there was no distance in them, no resignation waiting quietly behind control. There was focus, intensity, and beneath it, something fragile, something that had not existed a minute ago. "You will lose the ability to bond," she said, not as a warning, but as a realization. "With anyone." The words hung between them, heavier than the countdown, heavier than the wind that still scraped across the metal beneath their feet. Ethan did not look away. "Yeah," he answered, simple, direct, as if he had already accepted that cost long before he stepped forward. 5 seconds. The system flickered again, recalculating, attempting to reconcile data that did not fit any known model. The red warnings dimmed, replaced by unstable readings that refused to settle into danger or safety. Lyra's fingers shifted, barely, a fraction of movement that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Ethan felt it clearly, the difference between passive contact and something chosen. "Why?" she asked, her voice almost lost to the wind now, quieter than it had been since the beginning. Not a demand, not an accusation, a question that mattered. 2 seconds. Ethan held her gaze, steady, even as the final numbers approached, even as every system around them waited for the inevitable conclusion that never came. "Because walking away was never the right answer," he said, and when the countdown reached 0, nothing broke, nothing failed, nothing ended. The only thing that changed was the silence, because for the first time, it was not empty. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, like a pressure releasing across the platform, subtle but undeniable, as every system that had predicted failure struggled to reconcile the absence of it. And Ethan felt it in the way his suit stopped shouting at him, the warnings fading into a low, uncertain hum while his own body settled into something that almost felt normal again, not unchanged, but stable, balanced on a line that should not have existed. His hand was still in hers, warm now, not burning, not wrong, just present. He exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him in a long, controlled stream as he finally let his other hand fall away from the override panel, the interface dimming as the system locked in the new parameters he had forced into place. No automatic correction, no return to baseline. This was permanent. He knew that without needing to check. Lyra did not pull back. Her gaze moved across his face with a kind of focus that was no longer clinical, no longer distant, as if she was seeing him for the first time without the filter of inevitability. "You remain functional," she said quietly, the words measured but carrying a weight that none of the earlier warnings had held. Ethan gave a faint nod, his shoulders loosening slightly as the last of the internal strain ebbed. "Last time I checked," he replied, his voice steadier now, though still touched by the edge of what he had just pushed through. Around them, the platform had not returned to normal. It had frozen in a different way, the scattered figures who had once turned away now standing at a distance, watching without stepping closer, their posture rigid with something that looked less like confidence and more like caution. They had seen systems fail before. They had not seen them rewritten. Lyra's fingers shifted again, this time not by accident, not by reflex, but with intention, adjusting against his hand as if testing the boundary of something new, something fragile that had never been allowed to exist. The faint glow beneath her skin dimmed slightly, not disappearing, but softening, as though the field around her was responding to a signal it did not recognize. "You have severed your own resonance pathways," she said, more certain now, her voice carrying the clarity of understanding as it settled into place. "You cannot form a bond. Not with me. Not with any of your kind." The words were not a judgment. They were a statement of fact, one that defined a cost far greater than the 60 seconds everyone else had feared. Ethan glanced down briefly at their hands, then back to her, his expression calm in a way that made the decision seem smaller than it was. "Yeah," he said simply. "That was kind of the point." A flicker of something crossed her face again, deeper this time, harder to name, because it did not fit into the categories her world had built. It was not gratitude. It was not confusion. It was something that existed between them, in the space created by a choice no one else had made. The wind continued to scrape across the platform, carrying dust that no longer seemed sharp, the sound softer now, less intrusive, as if the environment itself had shifted with them. "Then what remains?" Lyra asked, her voice lower, not demanding an answer, but needing one, if not a bond. Ethan considered that for a moment, not searching for a perfect explanation, not trying to fit it into a system that had already failed them both. His grip adjusted slightly, steady, present, real. "Choice," he said at last. "No system, no alignment, just staying." The word lingered, simple and unadorned, but heavier than anything else that had been said. In the distance, a low tone echoed across the station, not an alarm, not a warning, but a signal, something official, something that meant this moment had already been noticed by more than just those on the platform. Lyra's eyes shifted briefly toward the source, then back to Ethan, the fragile balance between them holding steady. "They will not understand this," she said. Ethan gave a small, almost tired smile, the kind that came from experience rather than optimism. "They do not have to," he replied. And for the first time since the platform had filled with silence, Lyra did not look like someone waiting to be left behind. The signal did not repeat, but its presence lingered in the air like a shift in gravity, subtle yet impossible to ignore, and Ethan felt it not through his suit or his sensors, but in the way the platform changed around them. The distant figures no longer just observers, but something closer to witnesses, as if a line had been crossed that could not be unseen. He slowly released her hand, not out of fear, not because something was wrong, but because the moment had already proven what it needed to, and the absence of contact did not erase what had happened between them. The warmth remained, faint but real, like an echo his body had not yet decided to let go of. Lyra's hand lowered by a fraction, her fingers curling slightly as if registering the loss of something she had never expected to feel in the first place. For a brief second, her gaze followed the space between them, as though mapping the absence with the same precision she once reserved for danger. Then she looked back at him. "You altered the outcome," she said, her voice steady again, but no longer distant, each word placed carefully, as if she was building a new understanding one piece at a time. "But not the system itself." Ethan tilted his head slightly, considering that, the faint hum of his suit settling into a quiet baseline as internal diagnostics recalibrated around his new normal. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Systems like this do not change overnight." He glanced around the platform, at the architecture, at the symbols etched into the metal, at the invisible rules that had shaped every decision made here long before he arrived. "But sometimes you do not need to change the system," he added, his voice calm, almost reflective. "You just need to prove it is not absolute." Lyra followed his gaze, her eyes tracing the same structures, the same space that had once defined her limits with perfect clarity. Now it looked different. Not broken, not gone, just incomplete. The wind eased for a moment, the sharp edge of it softening into a low, steady current that brushed against them without resistance. "They will respond," she said, not as a threat, but as a certainty grounded in everything she had known before this moment. "This deviation will be recorded, analyzed, corrected." Ethan let out a quiet breath, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. "Yeah," he said again, a little softer this time. "That sounds about right." He reached up and tapped the side of his helmet, the visor dimming as he disengaged part of the overlay. letting him see her more clearly without the constant interference of data and translation. For the first time since he stepped onto the platform, he was looking at her without numbers trying to explain her. But correction only works when you understand what you are fixing, he continued. And right now, they do not even have a category for this. Lyra studied him in silence, the weight of his words settling in a place that logic alone could not fully reach. Her posture shifted slightly, not in defense, not in retreat, but in something closer to presence, as if she was no longer standing in a space waiting for rejection, but in one that had, somehow, made room for her. You have made yourself an anomaly, she said. Ethan shrugged lightly, the movement small but genuine. I have been called worse. There was a pause then, not empty, but full, carrying the quiet aftermath of a moment that had already changed more than either of them could measure. In the distance, the low signal returned, louder this time, accompanied by a shift in the station lighting, a subtle reorientation that suggested attention was being redirected toward them from somewhere far beyond the platform. Lyra's eyes flickered toward the source again, then back to Ethan, and this time there was no hesitation in her focus. You should leave, she said, her voice firm now, though not cold. This will escalate. Ethan met her gaze, steady, unhurried, as if the idea of leaving had already been considered and dismissed long before she spoke it. That would make this whole thing kind of pointless, he replied. A faint tension passed between them, not conflict, but the recognition of a choice that had not ended, only shifted into a different form. Lyra held his gaze for a long second, then another, searching for something that might still resemble the patterns she understood. She did not find it. Instead, she found consistency. Then you intend to remain, she said. Ethan nodded once. Yeah. He glanced briefly toward the approaching shift in the station, then back at her, his expression calm, grounded in something simple and unshakable. I told you, he said quietly. No system, just staying. And this time, when the signal grew louder and the attention of an entire structure began to turn toward them, Lyra did not stand alone in it. The platform lights shifted again, not brighter, not dimmer, but colder, the kind of sterile illumination that marked official intervention rather than environmental change, and Ethan felt it immediately in the way his suit recalibrated its sensors. Tagging new movement at the far end of the docking ring, where figures began to emerge in precise formation, their steps synchronized, their presence deliberate, like a system manifesting itself in physical form. They did not rush. They did not need to. Authority did not rely on speed. Lyra saw them before Ethan turned, her posture straightening by instinct, by training, by something deeply ingrained that even this moment had not erased. They have come to contain the anomaly, she said quietly, her voice returning to that measured clarity. But now it carried something else beneath it, something that had not existed before he stepped forward. Not distance, not obedience, awareness. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, watching the approaching line of figures, their armor reflecting the station lights in clean, controlled angles, their movement too precise to be anything but intentional. His visor flickered as it tried to classify them, but the system hesitated, lacking full access to whatever authority they represented. He let out a slow breath. Yeah, he said. Figured they would not send a thank you note. The figures stopped about 20 feet away, forming a quiet barrier rather than an aggressive one, their stance firm but not overtly threatening, as if even they were uncertain which protocol applied to what they were facing. One of them stepped forward, slightly ahead of the others, their presence marked not by size or posture, but by the way the others aligned around them. A leader, or something close enough. When they spoke, their voice carried through the air without strain, amplified just enough to reach both Ethan and Lyra without distortion. Subject Lyra Vey, the voice said, precise and neutral. You have deviated from established biological parameters. This state cannot be sustained within current system tolerances. There was no accusation in the tone, no emotion at all, just statement. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just settling into a position that felt intentional. He did not interrupt. Not yet. Lyra's gaze remained steady, her eyes meeting the speaker without lowering, without yielding, though Ethan could see the tension in the slight lift of her shoulders, the controlled way she held herself against the weight of that voice. The deviation has already been sustained, she replied, her tone calm, measured, but no longer empty. The parameters are incomplete. A pause followed, subtle but real, as if the system itself needed a fraction of time to process the response. The figure at the front tilted their head by a fraction, a movement so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching closely. Incomplete parameters do not justify instability, they said. The human subject has introduced a non-compliant variable. This will be corrected. Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose, the faintest hint of a smile touching the corner of his mouth, not out of amusement, but recognition. He had heard that tone before. Different worlds. Same logic. Fix the problem. Restore the system. He stepped forward then, just enough to place himself clearly within their line of attention, not blocking Lyra, not shielding her, just present. You keep using that word, he said, his voice steady, carrying across the short distance without needing amplification. Corrected. The figure's gaze shifted to him, assessing, calculating, not dismissing, but not engaging on equal terms either. The current state deviates from functional design, they replied. Correction is required to maintain systemic integrity. Ethan nodded once, as if acknowledging the logic, even agreeing with part of it. That makes sense, he said. If your system actually understood what it was looking at. Another pause, slightly longer this time. The kind that suggested something had moved outside expected patterns. Lyra's eyes flicked toward him, not in warning, not in fear, but in something closer to realization, as if she was beginning to see the shape of what he was doing in a way that went beyond the moment itself. The figure at the front did not move, but the formation behind them adjusted by a fraction, subtle shifts in stance that suggested recalculation rather than escalation. Clarify, the voice said. Ethan glanced briefly at Lyra, then back at the line of authority in front of them. His posture relaxed but unyielding, grounded in something that did not rely on rank or system approval. You are trying to fix something you think is broken, he said. But what if it is not broken? He let the words settle for a second, not rushing them, not forcing the conclusion. What if it is just different? The wind moved again across the platform, softer now, carrying the faint hum of distant systems and the quiet tension of a moment that had shifted from survival into something far more complicated. Lyra stood beside him, not behind, not apart, and for the first time, when the system looked at her, it was not the only thing defining what she was. The word different did not disappear into the air. It lingered, heavy in a way that logic could not easily dismiss, and Ethan could see it in the slight shift across the formation, the almost imperceptible hesitation that moved through them like a ripple across still water, because systems were built to process known variables, not redefine them in real time. The lead figure remained still, but something in their posture tightened, not aggressive, not defensive, just recalculating. Difference without integration creates instability. The voice replied, measured as ever, but no longer immediate, no longer effortless. Unstable elements are resolved to preserve the whole. Ethan nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer, as if he had already walked through it before stepping onto this platform. Yeah, he said, his tone even, almost conversational despite the weight of what stood in front of him. That works when the system actually knows what stability looks like. A faint shift of air passed between them, the wind quieter now, as if even the station was holding its breath. Lyra did not speak, but Ethan felt her attention sharpen beside him, not just listening, but tracking every word, every nuance, every shift in the exchange, as if something inside her was aligning in a way her species had never accounted for. The figure at the front took a single step forward, closing the distance by less than a foot, but enough to signal a change in engagement. Define your position, human, they said. Clarify the function you intend to perform within this deviation. Ethan let out a slow breath, his shoulders settling, his stance relaxed but grounded, like someone who had already made the decision long before being asked to explain it. I am not here to fix her, he said. And I am not here to break your system. He paused just long enough for the words to land, to be processed, to create space for what came next. I am here to stay with her, he continued, without forcing either of us to become something we are not. The formation behind the lead figure adjusted again, subtle but synchronized, as if the statement had introduced a variable that did not map cleanly to any existing protocol. Lyra's fingers shifted at her side, not reaching for him, not retreating, just aware, as if the idea of staying carried a weight that her world had never allowed her to consider. Your presence alters projected outcomes, the figure replied. It introduces variables that cannot be predicted or controlled. Ethan gave a faint, almost tired smile, the kind that came from hearing the same argument in different forms across different worlds. That is kind of the point, he said quietly. A longer pause followed this time, stretching across the space between them, not empty, but dense with calculation, with systems trying to reconcile something that refused to be reduced. The station lights flickered once, briefly, as if a larger network somewhere beyond their view had taken notice, had begun processing, had begun deciding. Lyra stepped forward then, just a fraction, enough to stand fully beside Ethan rather than slightly behind him, her presence no longer defined by the space others had left around her. You classify me as unstable, she said, her voice calm, but carrying a clarity that had not been there before. Yet your parameters failed to predict this outcome. Her gaze did not waver from the lead figure. If your system cannot account for reality, then it is not stability you are preserving. The words landed differently than Ethan's had, not because they were stronger, but because they came from within the system itself, from someone who had once been defined entirely by its rules. The formation stilled completely. No adjustment, no shift, just stillness. The lead figure regarded her in silence for a moment that stretched longer than any before it, their posture unreadable, their response delayed in a way that suggested something deeper than simple calculation. Your assertion is noted, they said at last, though the tone had changed, not in emotion, but in weight, as if the system behind it had begun to recognize the cost of dismissing what stood in front of it. Ethan glanced at Lyra briefly, not interrupting, not guiding, just present, and in that small moment, something settled between them, not a bond defined by biology, not a connection enforced by systems, but something quieter, something chosen, something that did not need a name to exist. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the low hum of a station that was no longer entirely certain of its own conclusions, and for the first time, the system that had once defined everything stood at the edge of something it could not immediately resolve. The stillness did not break, it deepened, settling across the platform like a weight that pressed into every surface, every system, every thought that had once been simple and certain, and Ethan could feel it in the quiet hum of his suit, no longer alerting, no longer warning, just waiting, as if even the machines had reached the edge of their instructions. The lead figure remained motionless, but something had shifted behind the precision of their stance, a delay that stretched beyond normal response time. Not failure, not error, but something closer to evaluation at a level that was not meant to be seen. Lyra stood beside Ethan without moving, yet everything about her had changed, not in posture, not in form, but in presence, as if the space she occupied was no longer defined by absence, but by something that held its own weight against the system that had once dismissed her. The deviation persists, the voice said at last, quieter now, not in volume, but in certainty. Observed outcomes do not align with predictive models. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath steady, controlled, his stance unchanged. That tends to happen, he replied, his tone even, grounded, when the model is missing something important. There was no challenge in his voice. No defiance, just fact. The formation behind the lead figure did not move, but the air between them shifted, like pressure redistributing in a sealed chamber. Lyra's gaze remained fixed forward, but Ethan could feel her attention turning inward, processing, recalibrating, not through external data, but through something quieter, something that had been denied her for too long. Your system defines connection as alignment, she said slowly, each word deliberate, constructed with care, but alignment is not the only form of stability. The statement hung in the air, fragile and untested, yet undeniable in its existence. The lead figure tilted their head again, a fraction more than before, as if the movement itself carried weight now, as if even their physical responses were adjusting to accommodate something new. Clarify alternative stability, they said. Lyra did not hesitate this time. Choice, she answered. The word echoed differently when she said it. Not borrowed, not repeated, but owned, reshaped by her understanding of what had just happened. He does not align with me, she continued, her voice steady, and yet he remains. The outcome is not collapse. It is continuity. Ethan glanced at her briefly, not surprised, but aware, as if he had been waiting for her to reach that point on her own. The lead figure was silent for a longer stretch now, their stillness no longer just controlled, but heavy, as if something far beyond this platform was being consulted, calculated, reconsidered. The station lights dimmed by a fraction, a subtle shift that suggested resources being redirected, attention being drawn inward to processes that did not normally surface. Continuity without integration is inefficient, the voice finally replied, though the edges of certainty had worn thinner. Ethan let out a quiet breath, the faintest hint of a smile returning, not mocking, not dismissive, just patient. Yeah, he said, but it still works. The words were simple, almost understated, but they carried something the system could not ignore, because the evidence was standing right in front of it, breathing, stable, unchanged in the ways that mattered. Lyra took a small step forward then, not toward the formation, not away from Ethan, just forward, into a space that had once rejected her, claiming it without permission, without validation. Your efficiency is built on exclusion, she said, her voice clear now, unwavering. But exclusion is not the same as balance. The wind moved again, softer than before, carrying with it the low hum of a station that was no longer certain where its boundaries ended. The lead figure remained silent, but the formation behind them shifted, not in unison this time, but individually, small adjustments that broke the perfect symmetry they had maintained until now. It was subtle, but it was real. Ethan watched it without comment, recognizing the pattern, the moment when a system began to question itself not because it was told to, but because it could no longer ignore what stood outside its rules. State your intended outcome, the lead figure said at last, the words slower now, more deliberate. Ethan did not hesitate. Nothing complicated, he answered. We stay, you watch, and maybe you learn something your system did not account for. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something new, something unmeasured, something that did not fit into any category the station had ever needed before, and for the first time, the system did not move to correct it. The silence did not resolve into an answer. It transformed into something quieter, something heavier, as if the entire station had reached a point where its own logic could no longer move forward without first looking back at what it had just witnessed, and Ethan stood there with the same calm presence, his weight balanced evenly, his breathing steady, not waiting for approval, not preparing for conflict, just remaining exactly where he had chosen to be. The lead figure did not speak immediately, and for the first time since they had arrived, the delay felt intentional, not procedural, as if the system behind them had encountered something it could not reduce to a correction or an error. Lyra stood beside Ethan, her posture no longer shaped by expectation, no longer held within the narrow lines of what she had been told she was, and the faint glow beneath her skin had softened into something almost natural, like it had finally found a state that did not require justification. Observation will continue, the voice said at last, slower now, each word placed with care rather than certainty. No immediate correction will be enacted. The statement settled across the platform, not as victory, not as defeat, but as a pause, a rare and fragile space where the system chose not to act because it no longer understood enough to justify action. Ethan gave a small nod, not triumphant, not relieved, just acknowledging the moment for what it was. That is all we need, he said quietly. The formation did not advance. It did not retreat either. It held position, a boundary that no longer pressed inward, but did not fully release. The station lights adjusted again, warmer this time, barely noticeable, but enough to change the feel of the space, as if something deep within the structure had eased, even if it did not yet know why. Lyra's gaze shifted slowly from the lead figure back to Ethan, and there was no hesitation in it now, no distance, no question of whether he would still be there when she looked. He had chosen it, and that choice had held through every second that should have broken it. They will study this, she said softly, not as a warning, but as a simple recognition of what would follow. Ethan let out a quiet breath, the faintest hint of a smile returning, the kind that carried both acceptance and something lighter beneath it. Yeah, he said. That is kind of how change starts. He glanced up briefly, past the platform, toward the vast structure of the station stretching into the distance, systems layered on systems, all built on rules that had never needed to bend until now. They will try to define it, he added. Give it a name. Put it into a category. Lyra's eyes followed his gaze for a moment, then returned to him, steady, grounded in something that did not need translation. And if they cannot, she asked quietly. Ethan looked back at her, meeting her gaze without hesitation, without distance, his answer simple in a way that no system could improve. Then maybe they will have to accept it anyway. The wind moved gently across the platform, no longer sharp, no longer cutting, just present, carrying with it the low hum of a place that had not changed completely, but had shifted enough to make room for something new. Lyra lifted her hand slightly, not reaching, not testing, just holding it in the space between them, a quiet question that did not need to be spoken. Ethan saw it, understood it, and this time there was no hesitation, no countdown, no warning lights, just a simple, human choice as he placed his hand in hers again. No search, no imbalance, just warmth. They stood like that for a moment, not as an anomaly to be corrected, not as a problem to be solved, but as something that existed because they had chosen it to exist. The formation remained where it was, watching, not intervening, not defining, just observing. And somewhere beyond the systems, beyond the calculations, beyond the rules that had once seemed absolute, a new possibility settled into place, quiet and unannounced, carried not by force, not by design, but by two individuals who had done something far simpler. They had refused to walk away. And in a universe built on power and precision, that quiet refusal was the one thing no system had ever been designed to measure.